Hey, mate.
Hello and welcome to Gardening Australia. We are full to the brim with all the know-how and inspiration you need for the garden this week. So let's get to it.
I'm meeting the masterminds behind a wonderfully well-designed plant-filled paradise on a steeply stepped site.
I'm taking a look at a fantastic collaboration between gardeners and wildlife carers who have joined forces to help feed thousands of sick and injured animals in New South Wales.
If you've ever thought about growing herbs and leafy greens hydroponically in your backyard, I'm visiting a nursery owner who's doing just that. I can't wait to share some of her secrets with you.
And we meet a guide bringing peace and connection through the practice of forest bathing.
Nature makes people feel very relaxed. Nature is a therapist.
At this time of year, it's not hard to be inspired by the beauty of native plants. Everywhere you look, there's a stunning floral display. Enjoying them in the garden is one thing, but bringing some indoors will double the fun. Over to you, Clarence.
Australian flowers are loving the limelight. With influencers and artists styling them in spectacular arrangements. And right now, you'll pay a pretty penny for a bunch of these beautiful blooms. But if you're anything like me, you'll want to grow your own. But before we get started, let's get something straight. When we're talking about Australian native flowers, I mean species that are from Australia and not their ancient Gondwanan relatives. And that's right, Instagrammers, I am looking at you. Now, proteas and leucadendrons are beautiful plants, and they are related to lots from Australia, but they are not native flowers, at least not for about 180 million years. Some of our most iconic Aussie species are also some of the best cut flowers, with many producing large blooms over a long season. Banksias, what's not to love? Now, in most parts of Australia, there's bound to be a Banksia that will thrive near you. And so many of them make great cut flowers. There's around 170 different species, from trees to large shrubs, dwarf cultivars, and spectacular standards like this one. The conical inflorescence is comprised of hundreds of individual flowers and also last well in a vase. Many Hakea flowers also live long in a vase, with a huge variety of foliage and flower forms. Hakea fracesiana and Hakea baculenta are beauties, but any Hakea is worth a try. And once the flowers are finished, their woody seed pods also look great. A good thing to remember when picking flowers from woody shrubs is to resist going all the way into bare wood. It is much more likely that they'll recover and reshoot from a stem with foliage left on it. The waratah is another florist's favourite, and I reckon most Australian gardeners would have had a crack at cultivating one. Now, there are a handful of species, but the big red Sydney waratah is the queen of cut flowers. Now, they need shelter, perfect drainage and consistent moisture. But if you don't have the perfect spot in the garden, then you could try growing one in a pot. Now, use a good quality native potting mix and position it in a spot that is sheltered from hot winds and the western sun. Now, water well and wait for the show. Grevilleas, Aussie garden royalty. Now, there are many that'll hold well in a vase, but a word of caution if you are cutting. The sap of some grevilleas is a common allergen, so make sure you wear gloves and long sleeves when you are picking or cutting the flowers. And position them in a spot where they can be seen, but not touched. Short-lived annual and perennial pickers will always brighten your garden as well as your vase. The easy-grown Pelargonium australe are a perfect example. Now, they'll generously fill sunny spots in the garden with enough to spare for a bouquet. Of course, kangaroo paw. They'll leave an indelible paw print when it comes to flowers. Almost anywhere you are in southern Australia, there is an everlasting daisy for you. From the seas of annual rhodanthe to the adaptable and beautiful xerochrysum species. While they're fantastic when freshly cut, they can also be dried for an even longer lasting display. Whilst flowers are so often the focus, foliage also provides some stunning displays. And growing a good supply at home can make the most of even a few seasonal flowers. So just like the garden, grey, green foliage is a great complement for flowers of almost any colour. Thick, luscious wattles are an obvious choice, but also tea trees and eucalypts with their grey, green and even burgundy foliage produced in abundance. Some might think that picking is cruel, but in many cases, picking is good pruning. In fact, some of the most popular eucalypts used by florists are pruned to the ground, resulting in bursts of stunning juvenile growth. You can pick your plant and shape it at the same time. And don't forget the grasses. With soft, elegant foliage, flowers and seed heads, they can provide the perfect balance for any bunch. All right, it's time to make a bouquet. And here, I've got some Banksias, Geraldton wax, kangaroo paw, argyle apple. I'm not that great of a florist, but I'm gonna have a crack. The kanga's gonna be my feature. We'll see how that works. Put these in here. Got these two gorgeous big Banksias here. I reckon it's all right. Native flower bouquet. It's enough to make a big fellow weep. If you're anything like me, you won't need any excuse for more native plants. Next time, why not think about a few extras for picking?
What food can you grow in containers? Well, there's plenty of variety that you can grow in containers. Give them plenty of sun, that's really important. And pick the ones that are going to be more productive. Things like the cut-and-come lettuce, that's always good. Silver beet, it's a terrific plant. And kale, of course. What about chives? You get them growing endlessly. And of course, there's parsley. So many people say to me, I've got to go and buy some parsley. Why not grow it in a container? There's the flat-leaf parsley or there's the curly-leafed, and all are terrific. All of those plants will give you lots of flavour from your garden for years to come.
What's a fire ant nest look like? Well, first up, fire ants are a dangerous, aggressive, invasive pest which was first noticed in 2001. They'd like to go into open spaces, so near piles of mulch or open lawns. The nests don't have any particular entrance tunnel. In fact, they look like very finely sieved soil. The mound entrances can be flat, rather like a cowpat, or they can be raised up to 40 centimetres high. And if you approach them, fire ants will come streaming out and attack. Now, if you think you've seen a fire ant nest, report it directly to the National Fire Ant Eradication Programme and get their assistance.
How long should I wait for my seed to germinate? Well, depending on the plant variety, it might take anywhere from a few days to even years for that seed to go through the cycle and start producing leaves. Now, this is a tray of Dinella seed that I sowed about 2 years ago, and initially I was pretty disappointed with how many germinated. I had a handful of plants come up within about 12 months, but as I started to prick them out into larger pots and then put them out in the garden, I found that it stimulated even more to germinate. So for about 18 months, I've been pricking out continuous seedlings from this same tray. So I guess the message is that it is always worth waiting a little bit longer to see if you have even more success.
Here's an annoying problem with an easy fix. Have a look at this. You can see this hose nozzle is all blocked up to the point where it's just about useless. This is common in areas with hard water, where minerals, like calcium, precipitate and block up the holes. Thankfully, all we have to do is dissolve them. Here's what you do. Unscrew the cap. If you try and look through, you'll barely see any light at all. So just wipe off any gunk, pop it into a shallow bowl, pour some ordinary household vinegar in there, just to cover the surface of the cap, and leave that for 24 hours for the vinegar, which is an acid, to do its work. Now here's one that I did yesterday, had the same problem, and up against the light, it's streaming through. So screw that back on, plug it in, let's test it. Have a look at that. Good as new.
It's no secret I'm into landscape design, especially seeing where creative inspiration meets the challenges we all face with our planting spaces. Tammy's visiting a steep sloping garden where the designer's innovations will really make you stop and think.
We're in the leafy suburb of Camaret, just a few k's north of Sydney CBD. And from the street, you'd never guess that an award-winning garden sits just above this black garage. This is Cascade Garden. It was completed in 2021, and the steep local sandstone site is split into tranquil garden spaces with a boardwalk-style path in the centre. It's filled with carefully selected plants to suit its many microclimates. And at this time of year, the bold textures and forms are real show-offs. Unsure what could be achieved in this small space, the size of 2 adjacent double garages, the owners turned to garden designers Barbara Landsberg and Cherith Piper. What was your brief for the site, Barbara?
It started out as repairing the stairs and making the journey from the house, which is high above the street, to the garage much easier. So it was more about that journey and a little bit of garden improvement if possible.
So it fell to Barbara and Cherith to create that easy path, but they came up with so much more.
They were interested in native plants, so there was that idea of bringing nature in. And then there were, you know, hints that they liked the idea of water. She likes yoga, so we gifted her the yoga deck.
And the water feature. And citrus and herbs. But they were also unsure whether that could be achieved.
And what challenges did you face with the site? How did you navigate all that?
The challenges were, yes, fixing the stairs, and that was our first technical problem. And the second one was this is a garage roof. So we have very little soil depth. And there are also load restrictions on rooftops. So we needed to know those things and work within that parameter.
To keep our wild ideas in check. But still, this was possible.
And what did this look like before?
There was nothing, actually. And
desolate lawn.
That was it. That's a great description. Desolate lawn.
And the stairwell, obviously, coming up, some brutally clipped hedges. That was it.
So what was your key focus for the garden?
We didn't begin with the focus. One evolved, and we often start with a concept. And the idea of the Cascade Garden was to really emphasise this connection from high to low and how we would flow through the site. And it was this idea of coming off the stairs and creating a pooling space, somewhere that, you know, you would gather and spend time in.
The Cascade Garden, it helped us find the shapes of the garden.
Yeah.
It helped us also find the rhythm of the garden.
Tailor-made Corten steel balustrades intentionally hold you in the space, and there's a feeling of moving in and out, of being enclosed, but then the space opens up again.
In a small space, Corten's incredibly useful because it's such a thin and strong material. So in terms of the screens, they act as this dramatic entrance.
But the design on them was very much to do with the cascade as well.
Yeah, so taking this idea of spilling water and bubbling, cascading water, and also thinking about the location near the coast. And so that's the patterning that we sort of moved into the screens. And it's been a beautiful surprise to watch how the light plays with it as well, and the shadows track.
There has to be some fun and joy and unexpectedness in every garden.
Once the pair had figured out the levels of the path, the garden was divided into zones based on the multiple microclimates created by shading and soil depth. The largest section of planting is on the garage roof. Here, the soil is very shallow, so they had to be careful not to overload the building structure.
It's a difficult site because it's north-facing, so it is beaten by the sun and it's windy. So the plants had to be drought-tolerant and very good Australian environment plants, dry climate plants. And dry climate plants tend to have more superficial, shallower roots.
These sandstone boulders tie beautifully into the landscape, and the raised corten steel beds add extra depth and also house a citrus and thriving herb patch. An upper deck overshadows part of this area, creating a shady pocket. There's this giant void under the stairs. What did you do here to work through that?
Well, from the before photos, you'll see there were sort of sandstone blocks all stacked up like teeth. And we decided to use the corten and cut it into the rock, so it highlighted the line of the rock shelf. And that's the pocket of soil that then gives us this opportunity to plant out. And it was really different planting to the rest of the garden.
It's shady under there and far more protected, and so many of the plants in this exposed part of the garden wouldn't survive. So that required the right plants for shade and much more subtropical, showier plants. And luckily, the plants that love the shade are generally of a larger format, more architectural in their leaf form. So we've chosen Rhapis and Xanadus and Rojo Congos, and they create their own show.
And they are really thriving in that space.
Yeah.
And I can see, like, you've gone for really big, sort of bold plants and not lots of little tidbits. What was the reason for that?
If you have a plant or you know a plant will thrive in your space, don't just plant one. If it's got a small leaf and a smaller flower, plant many and make a great show of them, and have them at several points through the garden that not only do they draw the eye through and provide a rhythm, but together actually create a grand show.
Australian natives, like the grevillea and Guymea lily in particular, are holding their own. They're evergreen and add gorgeous texture to the garden. In a small garden, people often steer away from planting large trees for the fear it's going to overwhelm the space. How have you managed to incorporate them into the garden?
You don't need big trees, but there are many beautiful small trees. Trees are important to provide overhead canopy. They provide screening where they're needed. They're a habitat for wildlife. They allow dimension in a garden because you don't want everything down at your feet, so you're always looking down. You want also things that allow you to lift your head and overhead, which allows the garden to come fully around you.
We had to rescale the balcony that's it was looming. And so these trees on this side are especially really important in helping hold you in the garden and to stop that feeling like a two-storey house.
And to raise the garden to the terrace above and to the front door area, so that it wasn't just an experience when you're down here.
And what else can homeowners do to enhance their small space garden?
So not only should they look at what's within their garden space to work with, but what's beyond it. And it's what we call a borrowed landscape. And for here, there was wonderful screening on the neighbour's property that we could take advantage of. And also understanding that once you sit down in this space, you're actually tucked away behind the fence and you can't see the rooftops anymore, and you just have a sense of treetops surrounding you. So that space beyond the garden becomes really important.
And the owners are thrilled with the result.
Now, they live in it every day and they use it every day, and for us, that is a joy. And it surprised them how much the garden now plays a part in their lives.
Growing your own herbs is very rewarding. In small spaces, it's a great way to get connected to gardening and produce healthy, fresh flavours for mealtime. Jerry's visiting a nursery that's taking herb growing to the next level, using hydroponics.
Sarah Heath lives in Burpengary in the city of Moreton Bay, north of Brisbane, and she's running a nursery in the backyard of her suburban block. So how big is this nursery?
So we have a 3/4 acre block, yet I'm growing on 800 square metres.
Oh, I see. But she's doing it a little differently, using hydroponics.
It is. The system works using the principle of hydroponics to feed the plants through the water. We've got this channeling here, which is pumped up from our reservoir, and then it trickles down all of our channels, is collected and reticulates back into our reservoir. So we actually have no runoff waste whatsoever.
So it's water efficient, but is it really a technological system? Do you have computers and things like that behind everything?
No, it doesn't have to be. The principle of hydroponics is feeding the plant with its water, and you can do that with a simple timer and pump. It doesn't need to be very technical at all.
These little seedlings, they're standing in, it's not a drainage channel, is it?
No, it's a flat bed, and only the smallest amount of water actually needs to trickle past to be able to keep the plants moist. And then they grow up big and strong like this guy.
So how do you apply nutrients to feed your plants?
There are quite a few essential nutrients for plants, and all of those are added into the water through a formula and a B formula. These can be found at most hydroponic and growing shops for home growers. We do actually mix those up from the raw materials, getting in the nitrogen and calcium, and making sure all of our micronutrients are in there, fed like a cordial into our big reservoir tank. And so a small amount is given to the plants each day through that watering system.
What do you use for the growing medium?
It is mainly a washed river sand. However, I have added in a part of coir to be able to help with keeping water retention. Then, of course, we've used a light bedding of vermiculite for those seeds to help with them germinating.
Everything here is growing in the open, and yet I don't see any problems with pests or diseases. Are you ever tempted, or do you have to intervene?
No, we don't spray. We have a no spray policy here, and what we do is use nature. So we do have pockets of big plants that we continue to have grow, and they are the homes and habitats for all our predatory bugs and creatures that come out to control all of our pests.
One of the amazing things here is that you're using the underbench space for growing as well.
So it was by accident, really. So plants that weren't growing great above the channels, I would throw below the channels. And I found that they were growing so well. And then with the demand of edible flowers, it just seemed simple to plant the edible flowers underneath where they can grow organically and continue to grow because they get much bigger than what I can have in the smaller channels above.
You've got so many different types of leafy greens. Are there any that you'd recommend for a home gardener?
Absolutely. There are several different varieties of the same kind of salad leaf. So people might be very familiar with the red vein sorrel in their fancy salad leaves, but there are some varieties of sorrel that you can grow in your gardens, such as the sheep sorrel. This variety is a perennial ground cover, and it has a very pretty leaf, and a very bitey tang. So it's very nice to scatter that through a salad.
It's nice to see you've got kohlrabi growing here. It's not often it's grown as a leafy vegetable.
Well, of course, you can start using and eating the leaf as it's growing, but it's something wonderful, particularly for children when they're watching things in the garden, to see the bulbs swell up like that. These are our baby corianders. You can see that they've got their cottonelle leaf and they're coming out with that true leaf there. Now, these are the ones that are really popular with our chefs. So they're able to get the pot and actually cut that off at the base. And when we collect these pots back, we can wash them and reuse them again and again and again.
So this is your standard size pot?
Yes, we grow everything in the 50mm pots because that's what we can fit in our small space. So these are some of my favourite greens. This one here is an Asian green related to pak choi. However, this has more of a leaf and less of that stem, which I can find is a bit chewy when cooked in a stir fry.
So this is?
Comet Zuna.
Okay.
There's a red variety as well. Now this one is really good for those that have got a shady hot garden, because this is mushroom plant and it will love your shady areas, and it has a slight mushroom taste to it, but it's got a very crinkly texture to it. Good to put in a salad or at the end of cooking soups and stews because that heat will cook out the flavour.
If you've ever thought of setting up your own hydroponic system, Sarah's nursery should provide lots of inspiration.
The joy of growing the different types of plants and then sharing that with other people and getting more people to grow, that really does inspire me to keep on doing what I do.
Still to come on Gardening Australia, we meet some people growing food and habitat for our vulnerable native wildlife. Hannah shows us how to give fruit trees a healthy start. And we meet someone helping people connect and immerse themselves in nature. Have you ever planted something in the ground and it's got away from you? Well, Sophie's been there and she's going to show you how to roll up your sleeves and take back control.
When choosing plants for the garden, it can be a balancing act, particularly in a climate as tough as the Adelaide Hills. Plants need to be tough enough to handle the 40+ summer temperatures, long dry periods, and then months of winter frost. But sometimes a tough and reliable plant can push the friendship, spreading or self-seeding into parts of the garden where you don't want it to be. Some are easily controlled by diligently removing seed heads before they set seed, like with this euphorbia, or chipping out seedlings which appear. Others can have their boundaries reset with a sharp spade, but I'm going to get serious with an over-enthusiastic perennial. Some years ago, I planted out this perennial Aster, also known as an Easter daisy in Australia, for its masses of autumn blooms. It's a spreading perennial which marches through the bed via its densely interwoven rhizomes. The rhizomes are almost impossible for other plants to penetrate, so it has quickly grown to dominate the bed. While the floral display is long-lasting and beautiful, and the blooms are loved by the bees, butterflies and other beneficials like ladybirds and hoverflies, it's way too dominating and it's taking over my garden bed. It was quite tall, so at the end of autumn when the stem started to die back, I cut it down, but that won't stop it spreading. So I've decided that I'm going to pull it back and keep it at the front of the bed where I can manage it, but take it out at the back. Right, let's tool up. A good steel fork and a spade. This is going to be fun. The first thing to do is to dig up any plants you want to save. When I planted this perennial aster, it was amongst other perennials, but over time it smothered them all. And the only thing to survive are these two liliums. So I'm going to rescue them, grow them on in a pot to make sure there's no freeloaders, and then plant them elsewhere down the track. Some perennials will benefit from soaking them in water while you work, because it will allow you to wash the roots and see clearly any rhizomes or runners of the interloper that need to be removed. There you go. This is what the search was for, a special lilium. Now, I need to make sure that there's no little rhizomes left of the perennial aster, because they would cross-contaminate where I'm going to grow it. And I'm even going to grow it on in a pot for a year just to make sure there are no freeloading seeds. Now, with the precious plants out the way, I've got to get stuck into it. There's no real technique, just get it done. Because it's such a dense mat of rhizomes, I'm cutting them in squares like you would turf and knocking any extra soil off the bottom. As a spreading perennial, any piece with a root has a potential to reshoot, so you need to make sure that you dispose of it properly. So don't put them straight into the compost. You could put it in a green waste bin, or turn it into weed tea, or use black plastic or a tarp to solarise it and cook it. Or if it was something palatable, you could even feed it to your flock. If you're going to do a job like this, make the time and do it properly. Remove every little piece, or otherwise your effort is wasted. When you pull back an area of enthusiastic plants or weeds, it's important to be a little disciplined, watching for regrowth to ensure you've thoroughly removed the offending plant. If you immediately replant with bushy, long-lived plants, it'll be difficult to see any regrowth of the plant you've pulled back. It's not finished yet, but it does look better than it did earlier. My preference is to leave the area for 6 months so that I can spot any unwanted regrowth. However, if you're desperate to plant something, try annuals, flowers or veggies. I'm actually going to put some sunflowers in. Because they only have a relatively short life, and because they're tall, I'll be able to spot any regrowth underneath them as they're growing. We never stop learning in our gardens. Sometimes our best laid plants don't flourish, and other times plants grow too well. But the best thing is we can change our minds, our taste, and even our plants. It might just take a bit of hard work.
When do we truly see what foods our wildlife feed on? Or how much they need on a daily basis? Well, you get to know firsthand if you look after them. A sick or injured possum needs 1.5 kilos of browse every night, which means wildlife rehabilitators spend a lot of their time sourcing food. To overcome this problem, here at the Community Environment Centre in Annan Grove in Sydney, a special relationship has been forged between gardeners and wildlife carers growing the feed that animals need. Hey Jess, hey Sean. The scheme came about when wildlife carer Sean Warden came to the Hills Shire Environment Officer Jess Stein to see if plants and plots could be developed to cater for sick and injured animals. Jess, what did you think of Sean's idea?
I thought it was a great idea. I was like, hey, we've got this community environment centre, we've got an active volunteer community out here, we've got this beautiful native garden where we can collect food for wildlife, and we've got some spare land out the back where we can put in some, natural foliage.
And Sean, how is the garden here helping you now?
Well, you know what, it's giving wildlife carers the opportunity to reach out to the community But also, you know, these wildlife carers, their time is saved by lots of greens for their animals that are in care, and also gardeners, you know, to make a difference in the life of these animals.
So it's really like become a supermarket for your carers.
Yeah, exactly. They're able to come out at any time of night and harvest what they need for the animals.
What animals do you look after?
I look after possums, ringtail possums and brushtail possums. I look after all manner of gliders, so your feathertail gliders, your sugar gliders, and I've even had a pygmy possum in care, which was a real highlight.
Wow. And why generally have they come into your care?
Well, Costa, sometimes it can be hit by car and we have to go to where the animal is lying and make sure that there's no joeys on board and bring them into care. Other times it could be little Joey has just been separated from mum and mum's been spooked and little Joey doesn't know where to go, so we take it into care. We put it in a pod of other little Joeys and we raise them all up together for release. I've got 6 little ones and they come in and we have to hydrate them. Then we have to give them a specialised formula. And then they start gradually moving on to greens and different species of greens. The ringtail possum in particular is an interesting one because it needs 3 different types of eucalypt every single night in order to maintain a healthy gut.
What have you been doing to develop this garden as a restaurant for animals?
Our Community Environment Centre, we've had this native garden established over so many years. So we've got a huge range of flowering natives that already feed our local wildlife around the area, like the native noisy miner or wattlebirds, and that can also be a space where wildlife carers can collect from to feed their wildlife in care. And then we've also got our planting plots down the back where we've hand selected a number of local native species that wildlife carers really need that we can collect from to feed rescue wildlife that need it.
So different plants offer different opportunities for the species that you care for.
Yeah, exactly. So some species need the fresh tips, some need the flowers, and certain flower shapes as well. So, for instance, there's the Kunzia ambigua that is a favourite amongst possums, little joeys especially. It's a great introductory greens for them when they come off their specialised formula. You've got Grevillea, which is fantastic for the eastern spinebill with its curved beak. It can get right into the flower and suck out the nectar, but also the lorikeets love it as well.
So the centre here has become quite a harbour magnet for bringing the carers together.
Yeah, definitely. And we've seen that community of wildlife carers really grow so naturally as well.
Kate, what are you picking and who's it for?
Costa, this is just some Grevillea for some little birds I've got in care. All of the native birds require their natural native food when they're in care, and I'm picking some Grevilleas for some of the nectavores. I care for birds when they've either been abandoned or fallen out of nests and they can't be reunited with the parent birds, or alternatively damaged adults that are in care.
How important is access to the browse as a carer, having those beaks looking for food every day?
It's incredibly time-saving because you can spend hours of your day looking for enough flowers to feed all of the birds you've got in care.
How do you feel when they graduate and then you have to let them free?
It's a wonderful feeling to actually let them go into the wild, but I can promise you they never turn around and say thank you.
Hey Ravi, what are you foraging?
So Costa, today I'm foraging for blue-tongue lizards. So the blue-tongue lizards love the berries, wild berries, and also I've got some plum leaves. So just making sure I take back these to my enclosure and make a home for my blue-tongue lizards. I'm actually qualified professional snake catcher, which allows me to go out and catch and release snakes. So we get called out in terms of if there's any injured reptiles.
What are some of the animals you're caring for?
From brown snakes, and then red bellies, and then we got tigers and adders, and then we got bearded dragons. The native trees, the plants and the fruits are very good for them. But once they get better, they're back home, meeting their families, they're meeting their brothers and sisters, and they're just happy.
You know, I feel so energised by hearing the volunteers and the stories and what they're up to.
Yeah, Costa, look, there are 6,000 people just like me who care for these wildlife. They need the greens. They need exactly what this project is bringing to them. We care for hundreds of thousands of animals every single year, and this takes some of those hours and gives it back to the rehabilitators who already give so much.
Whoa, Jess, I mean, what are you seeing for the future?
Well, the Growing Food for Wildlife project has just been such a fantastic initiative. So it's about spreading that word, and hopefully, you know, other councils maybe and other community might want to get involved as well.
I mean, what an invitation, gardeners, that we can grow native plants in our area and in our community to not only enjoy, but to provide food for our wildlife. It doesn't get better than that.
I'm going to show you how to train young fruit trees headed in the wrong direction into the right shape for good tree access and health. I've got a few olive trees here, all between 1 and 2 years old, but they need a bit of a helpful shaping so they can develop into accessible and healthy mature trees. Some are growing on a strong lean, and it's time to give them support so they can straighten up and train branches to be easy to harvest fruit from and be resilient in the face of strong winds. There can be a few reasons for trees heading to the ground. Strong winds, lots of rain destabilising soil, or they simply haven't got their roots established in the ground enough to support themselves yet. Without help, they may still provide fruit, but they're at risk of snapping or being uprooted. But there are a couple of steps you can take to train them. Firstly, you want to identify the leader. This is the main trunk, which ideally you want to be nice and straight. Drive a stake into the ground with a decent gap from the trunk to prevent damaging the roots. It should be deep enough to stay upright whilst withstanding the pull of the tree. It can help to use 2 to 3 stakes if the tree is in a particularly exposed or vulnerable site. Use soft fabric ties to secure to the trunk. Next, we're going to create a vase shape. This simply means choosing 3 to 4 main branches that are evenly spaced. We're going to be training them at approximately a 45-degree angle. This increases the airflow and prevents any disease from occurring. It also keeps the growth nice and close to the ground for easier access. They're young enough, it means the branches and the trunk are still thin and pliable, so I can actually bend them and put a fair bit of tension on them without them snapping. I use a combination of bricks and stakes. Bricks are perfect for weighting down branches, while stakes can be used to train branches up or down. These stakes and bricks aren't a permanent fixture, just until the tree can stand up on its own.
I want to show you one of my favourite plants, really versatile and good in lots of different situations. It's a type of spurge, it's Euphorbia rigida, and you can see I've got it planted both on the shady side of this area and in the sun. In a hot, hot spot, it is fine, and you can see it's really nice and compact and then produces these amazing octopus arms of beautiful grey foliage and then these fantastic displays of flowers and bracts in the wintertime. The flower itself is actually quite small. It's this tiny little thing in the centre, and the most colourful part, hey Squiddy, the most colourful part is a bract that's used to draw attention to that flower. And interestingly, they're not really pollinated by bees, which you might think. They're one of the many, many plants that are pollinated by flies who also come to collect pollen and nectar. They do a really important job. Of course, these flowers are gorgeous and the bracts there, but I think this plant has appeal all through the year. When these are finished, they fade right off in late spring. You cut it right back down at the ground, and that encourages this steely new growth. Of course, it is a euphorbia, so you need to be a bit careful of the white milky sap. It can burn, so make sure you've got some gloves on. But really, I think this is a great plant for full sun, part shade. It gives all year round. Give it a go.
Whether it's a walk in the bush, pottering in the garden, or stopping to take a moment with a beautiful tree, we all can feel a sense of calm and rejuvenation when we have a moment with nature. Our next story is with someone who helps people connect with these moments through the practice of forest therapy.
When you walk in nature, nature makes people feel very relaxed. Nature is a therapist. My name is Mayu Kataoka. I am a forest therapy guide. Forest therapy is based on the practice of Japanese forest bathing. We say Shinrin Yoku, slow walk in nature. When I take people into the forest, it's a sensory experience. Notice about the colors, notice about smells and sounds. I encourage people to scorch the leaves, squash it, and take a smell. It's a beautiful lemon-scented tea tree. Just be in the moment to just focus on that scent. People start feeling, this is nice. And smell is connecting the memory directly. So this smell maybe triggers some childhood memory, I don't know, but it will bring you back, straight away back to where it was. The word Shinrin Yoku was introduced in 1982 in Japan. Back then, technology started booming and people worked overtime and people start collapsing, getting more stress-related illness. So the Japanese government says, why don't you go into nature? And let's call it as a forest bathing, as if you were having a hot bath. Because when you are soaked in the hot water, you don't want to go rush, yeah? You want to be with that moment. You want to soak a little bit more. People who live in the city, they're always constantly stimulated by the man-made noise and walk in a concrete paths. Their mind and brains doesn't rest at all. So forest bathing for people who lives in the city gains, I think it's a lot of benefit to getting back to themselves, to feel the soil, to understand that we are living creatures, not the robot, you know. We have a sense, we have feelings and everything, that we just don't use it. Fresh air clears your mind. The smell of the forest relaxes your mind and lower your heart rate. And some people say it eased the pain, like headaches, stiffness on the shoulders, back pain, because when we have a pain, the focus is always there. But the good practice of forest bathing is just focus on the moment and you just be with your sense. When I've gone forest bathing, I feel very connected, even with these dried leaves, because they age like we age. In Japan, we have an aesthetic philosophy called wabi-sabi. Admire beauty in imperfection, which is like a skeleton of the leaf, almost the end of life of this leaf. It's kind of nostalgic, sentimental, but I see the beauty behind of these brown skeleton leaves. Used to be up on the trees, very green, fresh green like that, but now it's falling off and it's eventually back to the soil, back to the nutrients, to the forest. You can practice shinrin-ryoku even if you don't have a garden. Start practicing shinrin-ryoku with trees on your street. Observe the trees seasonally, changing colors, shedding bark. You start building up that specific connection as if the trees or potted plant are your family, your friends, and you get to know each other more. That is the essence of shinrin-ryoku. One of the important elements in forest bathing is to notice yuragi. It's the tiny little movements in nature. Could be the sound of the creek or the birds. Everything is moving and flowing in nature, and we have that yuragi in our body. We blink, or we breathe in and out, or the way your internal organ moves, or the way your blood goes through your body. So these yuragi in your body and yuragi in nature, synchronize it once you are in nature. And that's why we all feel, it triggers physiological relaxation because we recognize each other. I was born in Kanagawa Prefecture, in the main island in Japan. My father was quite a strict person, and I was always loved to be in nature. Yeah. Growing up in Japan, I realized that you kind of silently have to adapt with the society. If you want to say something, if you want to stand up, you will be suppressed. And I felt kind of very squashed in that way of living. So I made a big decision. I always wanted to go live in overseas. And I'm not going to tell this to my dad. So I secretly planned for the trip to Australia. My mum knew. But I planned everything, I prepared everything, I booked the ticket, and one day I said, I'm going to Australia. My father didn't say anything. Now I think he probably knew, but he didn't say anything. You know, he knew that I was very stubborn anyway. They came to the airport to see me off, and we're all crying. But I think now I understand that that was also part of his love, and I didn't see when I was young, but I see lots more as I get older about the silent love from my parents, that they always supported me.
There's nothing like a good dose of garden therapy. To set it in motion, here's your list of jobs for the weekend. In cool areas, take cuttings of coria and start a new hedge. Select soft stems that will bounce back when flexed, then pop into rooting gel and an aerated potting mix. Tip prune banksias to keep them bushy and remove dead flowers and branches. Take care to retain most of the old wood. That's where they'll flower next year. Delicata squash grows groovy skins and a creamy flesh that is sweet when cooked. Sow seeds directly into aged compost about 1 metre apart and then mulch. In warm temperate areas, brighten up the baskets by planting Calibrachoa. These colourful petunia cousins love free-draining soil in a sunny spot. Plant passion fruit in pairs 1 metre apart to aid pollination. Build up a mound of rich, loose soil, plant with a layer of mulch and give them something to climb up. Hardy Hebe shrubs are in bloom and will appreciate their yearly dose of compost. Trim back by about 1/3 after flowering to maintain their compact form. In subtropical areas, marigolds are blooming for the Festival of Lights. These companion plants attract plenty of pollinators. Celebrate these garden heroes by planting more. Flying foxes are out and about and having babies. Why not plant some flowering gums to provide food for future generations? Okra is a reliable summer crop and loves the heat. Sow seeds are knuckle deep in composted soils in full sun. Use stakes to keep them sturdy and protect from winds. In tropical areas, strappy natives such as Lamandra can deal with water inundation as well as droughts. They'll stabilise a soggy spot and provide a source of food and habitat. Get down to your specialist nursery and grow a vanilla pod vine. This climbing orchid is ready for its yearly trim and grows well from cuttings planted now. Divide bromeliads and spread the love. Snip pups from the mother plant and pot into orchid bark. Or take advantage of their epiphytic nature and mount on a tree. In arid areas, geraniums are drought hardy and will bloom right through summer with regular water. Water in the morning once a week and let soil dry out in between. Pomegranate flowers are out and attracting pollinators. Ensure the flowers fruit by transferring pollen with a small paintbrush early in the morning. With sprigs of rosemary being handed round tomorrow, plant these cuttings into moist, free-draining propagation mix to keep the memory alive. Go on, gardeners, get out there and give the garden some love. For more ideas on what to do next, sign up for our newsletter via our website. Well, that's it for another week, but we're already working on next week's harvest. Here's what's in store.
Pruning is something you think about for your outdoor plants. But what about your indoor plants? Well, they need pruning too, and I'll show you the different ways you can go about it.
Today, I'm going to take a shallow dive into the watery world of aquatic plants, which best to choose for different depths and how to plant them up.
And spring. It is such a prolific time of the year, not only for growth in the garden, but also for those jobs that you've got to get done. And I've got my top list for you.